Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the idea of coincidences and how there is no such thing as coincidences. Now, this is an important concept to try to deal with in terms of understanding what's happening in the world itself. Important strategic military and national sites in Iran are blowing up, catching fire and blowing up. When you ask Iranian leadership, they say that the destruction is simply a series of mishaps and coincidences that just seem to be taking place in similar sites within a very short period of time inside Iran. That they are all coincidences. Only one of these instances has been properly covered in the Western press. It took place on Thursday, July 2nd. An explosion and fire broke out in the Natanz, just outside of Tehran. The Natanz is one of the not-so-secret nuclear sites in Iran. Most of the facility is buried deep below the ground. The fire broke out above ground in a facility that stored gas-filled centrifuges. This precise explosion and fire, limited to the centrifuges building, may have set back Iran's timetable for creating a nuclear bomb by 12 months. And that's a very important number. Maybe even a little more, maybe even a little less. But here are some other coincidences that the Western press did not necessarily cover that I think are important for us to take a look at. The next day, July 3rd, an explosion destroyed a missile depot belonging to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. At the very same time, there were explosions and power outages reported in two cities, Quds and Gamardara. On Monday, July 6th, only 2 days later, 2 people were killed and 3 injured in Safahan Brosh factory, which is in Bakashar, near Tehran. The factory manufactured military parts for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And then there was a gas storage facility near Tehran that suffered an explosion mysteriously and caught on fire, obviously. And the power outage in a major medical facility, and a fire on July 4th at Shahid Majada, a power plant in Ahvaz. An hour later, there was a chlorine leak, and a transformer exploded. These are all happening, and there's even more. On video, I was watching nighttime fires of several power stations explode. The flames were visible for miles around. But the incidences, these coincidences, were not covered to any great extent in the Western media, and understandably. The expatriate Iranian press, however, covered them. In addition to that, the Israeli press covered them, as well as some Arabic press covered them. Only Iranian leadership had the gumption to call these instances coincidences and minimize them. Of course, they had to minimize them. However, all fingers were pointing towards Israel for engineering a computer hack that is causing these mishaps. Although Iran is actually investigating the Natanz issue as one of sabotage. Given the history between Iran and Israel, and given the dynamics in the region, let alone the usual and constant verbal vitriol, the theory makes sense. But according to Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who is in line to become Prime Minister after Netanyahu, and he's the former Chief of Staff of the IDF, he said that all these mysterious events in Iran are not necessarily the work of Israel. So Iran is also now looking at local sabotage as an option for these disasters. But this might all be a smokescreen. Why? Very simply, Israel is almost certainly responsible for the breakdown of the nuclear facility. Israel has said that it will never allow Iran to attain a nuke. And that attack, like many other attacks, seemed to mimic the Israeli-initiated Stuxnet series of cyber attacks employed against Iran in the past. They are, however, unconfirmed and unsubstantiated. They are whispers, saying that one, if not several, of the explosions were not cyber hacks. And indeed, they are also being touted as the work of Israel's stealth and invisible F-35 fighter jet. The downside of Israeli cyber counterattacks and hacks, assuming they were hacks and perpetrated by Israel, of course, is that Iran will now be able to decipher and decode these specific secret cyber techniques. Once Iran's cyber units learn what happened and how it all happened, they, that is the Iranians, can use what they learned against their enemies. That's where a problem exists. Israel, or whoever attacked them, will have to go back to the proverbial cyber warfare drawing board to create new attacks, which I'm sure they have a slew of anyhow. The hacks they have used against Iran can never be used again against Iran. The Iranians will be on the lookout and set up defenses against any variant form of that very attack. Israel can use that attack method only once against Iran. In terms of security and defense, that's a small price for Israel to pay. It was essential for Israel to let Iran know that they are vulnerable, that is, that Iran is vulnerable to Israel. To prove it to them over and over and over again, Iran's unsuccessful but nonetheless highly advanced attack against Israel's water and chlorine mixture facility, which took place earlier. It broke through the glass ceiling, in other words. Israel needed to respond and let Iran know that at any moment and in so many crippling ways, Israel can strike and attack Iran. Iran will respond. That's definite, because that's their style. One of Iran's proverbial traits is tit for tat. But the Iranians are patient. They are not immediate in their response time. Their MO, their modus operandi, is to lick their wounds, gather details, and then pounce. Because so many people are pointing the finger at Israel, and because so many people are saying that it was a series of cyber attacks, Iranian leadership interpret this as a violation of their prowess and technical skills, and they are not pleased. Tehran will launch counterattacks to Israel's counterattack. Hopefully, they will be repelled. Israel will not publicize most of the attacks against them, not dissimilar to Iran. It's all about national ego. Israel probably will release information on some of the attacks against them. They will even watch as an attack advances through the computer system and give Iran the satisfaction of success as they shut it down. Attack, counterattack, that seems to be the MO. And it's going to be very interesting. Computers, it sounds like a game, but it's more than that. It's really about life and death. Here's some not so good news for lovers of equality and freedoms around the world. Poland's conservative president, Andrzej Duda, who ran a campaign of homophobic and anti-Semitic overtones, narrowly won a second 5-year term in a bitterly fought weekend election in Poland, defeating the liberal Warsaw mayor, according to a near-complete count of the votes. Duda's supporters celebrated what they saw as a clear mandate from the voters for him and the right-wing ruling party, not just right-wing, but extreme right-wing ruling party that backs him, called the Law and Justice Party, to continue on a path that has reduced poverty but raised concerns that democracy is under threat. Critics and human rights groups expressed concerns that Duda's victory would boost radical tendencies, not only at home in Poland, but also within the EU, especially Hungary, under Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The election in Poland was filled with anti-Semitic overtones and implications. Duda has been very public about using Israel and the Jews as a foil, as a utensil, as a tool to show how important it is to stand up to international pressure, in other words, Jewish pressure. The tensions between Israel and Poland just on the issue of the Holocaust still exists and are not even below the surface. Duda and his followers refuse to admit that many Poles worked with the Nazis, that all Poles were not victims. This is a very problematic election result. Coming up next, points of view. On July 8th, the New York Times published an op-ed by Peter Beinart. Like many of Beinart's opinion pieces, this one has people talking. Peter Beinart wrote about creating a one-state solution instead of a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. The New York Times piece, and this is important to get a sense of, is actually a shortened version, a condensed version of a 7,000-word essay he originally wrote for a different publication, The Jewish Currents, that was actually published the day before on July 7th. Jewish Currents was officially affiliated with the Communist Party. the United States Communist Party, if you can imagine that. He's publishing it there. We have mentioned Jewish Currents before, because that's where Bernie Sanders penned his Zionist manifesto when he was still a candidate for the Democratic presidential election, trying to describe why and how he is pro-Israel. We are going to use Beinart's Jewish Currents essay as the foundation of our discussion instead of the New York Times, because it's a better example and better fleshed out in the ideas. There are many similarities. Actually, it's very clear that he just lifts certain parts and makes it one and the other. But the parts that I want to emphasize are actually not necessarily in the New York Times piece. After we look at Beinart's piece, we're going to examine Ben Dror Yamini's response that was published in Ynet, where he is a columnist. Whatever you think of Beinart's point of view, he is a voice to many Jewish liberals in the Jewish community in the United States and around the world, actually. He's an affiliated Jew. He's a member of Jewish organizations. He sends his children to Jewish day schools. Okay, it's important to recognize this. He is not an outsider. He is not an anti-Semite. That should be absolutely clear. You might disagree with him, but he is not an anti-Semite. He is, by the way, and I'm going to note this several times, wrong. But being wrong doesn't necessarily make you an anti-Semite. And he is also often used by anti-Semites. That's a different issue. In my opinion, he is wrong in his analysis. He is not the anti-Semite that everyone calls him. Unfortunately, however, many anti-Semites and BDSers use his material and his analysis to hurt Israel. This is how Beinart begins. What makes someone a Jew, not just a Jew in name, but a Jew in good standing today? In Haredi circles, being a real Jew means adhering to religious law. In leftist Jewish spaces, it means championing progressive causes. But these environments are the exceptions. In the broad center of Jewish life, where power and respectability lie, being a Jew means, above all, supporting the existence of a Jewish state. In most Jewish communities on earth, rejecting Israel is a greater heresy than rejecting God. He continues. The reason is rarely spelled out, mostly because it's considered obvious. Opposing a Jewish state means risking a second Holocaust. It puts the Jewish people in existential danger. In previous eras, excommunicated Jews were called apikorsim, unbelievers. Today, they're called kapos, Nazi collaborators. Through a historical sleight of hand that turns Palestinians into Nazis, fear of annihilation has come to define what it means to be an authentic Jew. I grew up with these assumptions, and they still surround me. They pervade the communities in which I pray, send my children to school, and find many of my closest friends. Over the years, I've learned how to live in these spaces while publicly questioning Israel's actions. But questioning Israel's existence as a Jewish state is a different order of offense, akin to spitting in the face of the people I love and betraying institutions that give my life meaning and joy. Besides, Jewish statehood has long been precious to me too. So I've respected certain red lines. Now, this is Beinart's way of saying that he's trying to argue from within a tradition of arguments within the Jewish community. He lays out a premise of his point of view, that two states cannot happen anymore. It's time to switch to a one-state solution. Palestinians and Jews living together, not separate. He writes, the painful truth that is the project to which liberal Zionists like myself have devoted ourselves for decades, a state for Palestinians separated from a state for Jews, has failed. The traditional two-state solution no longer offers a compelling alternative to Israel's current path. It risks becoming instead a way of camouflaging and enabling that path. It is time for liberal Zionists to abandon the goal of Jewish-Palestinian separation and embrace the goal of Jewish-Palestinian equality. He continues to explain that, quote, this does not require abandoning Zionism. It requires reviving an understanding of it that has largely been forgotten. It requires distinguishing between form and essence. The essence of Zionism is not a Jewish state in the land of Israel. It is a Jewish home in the land of Israel, a thriving Jewish society that both offers Jews refuge and enriches the entire Jewish world. It's time to explore other ways to achieve that goal, from confederation to a democratic binational state, that don't require subjugating another people. It's time to envision a Jewish home that is a Palestinian home too. Now, Beinart ends his essay writing that Israel is no longer a tikkun, a repair for the Holocaust, that Israel has oppressed the Palestinians, and now Israelis need to live side by side by those whom they oppressed. He writes, and this is the beginning of his end. For generations, Jews have seen a Jewish state as a tikkun, a repair, a way of overcoming a legacy of the Holocaust. But it hasn't worked. To justify our repression of Palestinians, Jewish statehood has required us to see them as Nazis. And in that way, it has kept the Holocaust legacy alive. The real tikkun is equality, a Jewish home that is also a Palestinian home. Only by helping free Palestinians, and in the process, coming to see them as human beings, not the reincarnation of our tortured past, can we free ourselves from the Holocaust grip. The Hebrew word for peace, shalom, is connected to the word shlemut, wholeness. Only Palestinian freedom, a precondition for true peace in Israel-Palestine, can make Jews whole. And now he ends with a very interesting conclusion. Because finally he quotes from the famous rabbinic story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, symbolizing the end of Jerusalem as an era and the beginning of the next stage, the rabbinic center of life shifts from Jerusalem to Yavne. And this is what he says. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked the Roman emperor to give him Yavne, he was acknowledging that a phase in Jewish history had run its course. It's time for Jews to imagine a different path. That time has come again. Imagine a country in which at sundown on the 27th of Nisan, the beginning of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, Jewish and Palestinian co-presidents lower a flag in Warsaw Ghetto Square at Yad Vashem as an imam delivers an Islamic dua for the dead. Imagine those same leaders on the 15th of May gathering at the restored center in the village of Dir Yassin, the site of a future museum of the Nakba, which commemorates the roughly 750,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled during Israel's founding. As a rabbi recites the Keil Malei Rachamim, our prayer for the dead. Again, strongly argued, but deeply, deeply wrong. Ben-Dror Yemini explains where Beinart is so off in his thinking, in a piece that comes from Ynet, where he is a regular columnist. The column is actually called Peter Beinart is neither a Zionist nor a liberal. Ben-Dror writes, now liberal Zionists, wrote Peter Beinart in his July 8th editorial in New York Times, must make a decision too. It's time to abandon the traditional two-state solution and embrace the goal of equal rights for Jews and Palestinians. It's time to imagine a Jewish home that is not a Jewish state. Beinart is the high priest of the Jewish American left. He is also J Street's unofficial ideologue. He is a perplexing notion. You can argue about the rights of the Kurds to have an independent state, or the Catalans, but there is no precedent in these times to rescind an already existing state. That's the question they actually ask. Ben-Dror Yemini is actually attacking that very question in his essay, which is very, very important as he critiques Peter Beinart. Ben-Dror offers numerous examples of how Beinart has a double standard, how he holds Israel to a standard and does not expect the same of the Palestinians. Even when the Palestinians do not hold up their own commitments, it's okay. Ben-Dror continues and explains that Beinart echoes the extreme right settler community, a tiny minority in the Jewish political world, who promote the one-state solution. He explains that it hardly reflects any Israeli point of view. This is what Ben-Dror Yemini writes. They are promoting the notion that the settlement movement has succeeded in upending the chances for a two-state solution. But that is not the case. Today, the settlements occupy 1.5% of the West Bank and have municipal reserves that include 7.9% of the territory. Most Israelis oppose even a partial annexation unless it is part of a peace. But Beinart is throwing the baby away with the bathwater. He negates the rights of the Jews to an independent state because a minority of them oppose rights of Palestinians to have the same. He supports the far-right policies of the settlers from his position on the left. The French call this the extreme set tranchant, which means opposite ends meet. Ben Dror opines about Beinart and rights. He is not motivated by a respect for the rights of both sides. He's fighting against the rights of one nation, out of all the nations of the world. He continues to write, this is Ben Dror again, his words carry weight in some quarters in the West, but there is nothing new in his message. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, BDS, campaign for the same thing has been rejected as anti-Semitic by the European Union, the German Parliament, the British Labour Party, and elsewhere. Denying the rights of Jews to a national homeland is anti-Semitism. Beinart is not anti-Semitic. His intentions are different, but his position assists the anti-Semitic campaign. Finally, Ben Dror writes that Beinart is not helping anyone but the extreme right and extreme left with his analysis. He puts it this way: Beinart's column is another small win for the Israeli far right and some Palestinians who oppose a two-state solution. He is not promoting peace and reconciliation. The far right deals in action as they work to achieve this nightmarish vision of one great state, now supported by Beinart's words and ideas as part of their own propaganda. A very interesting analysis. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I wanted to show you 3 cartoons today. The first stirred quite a controversy. It's from the Anderson County Review in Kansas, a suburb of Kansas City. The cartoon on the Anderson County Review's Facebook page depicts Governor Laura Kelly wearing a mask with a Star of David on it, next to a drawing of people being loaded onto train cars, and the caption is, "Lockdown Laura says, put on your mask and step onto the cattle car." In other words, there's an image of the Holocaust behind them. People were rightly disturbed by this. It was a misuse of the Holocaust itself. The publisher apologized, but the paper had never had such a response to anything before in its entire history. The vast majority of the responses were not from Jews. People were offended. The cartoon took the image too far. The next 2 cartoons actually are very, very similar, but it just goes to show that this is a genre with dozens and dozens of cartoons they dealt with. These were just the 2 best that I thought were worthwhile showing you. They deal with the toppling of statues, a subject we've dealt with in the past. The first is a solid cube of granite. The sculptor is about to begin carving out his art, but the protesters are already pulling down the granite. He asks, can't you at least wait and see what it's going to be first? The answer, no. We're already sure it's going to offend us. That's funny. The final cartoon is a meme in a similar vein. It is an empty square on the page. The caption reads, "Finally, I found a meme that won't offend anyone." Actually, I'm sure it would offend, because it's a white page with a black square. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. During the last week of June, a small and not very well-known office in the United States federal bureaucracy changed one of their policies. The U.S. Commercial Remote Sensing Regulatory Affairs Office decided that it will permit smaller images of Israel and the Palestinian Authority to be sold. Up until now, the images could not portray anything that was less than 2 meters or 6.5 feet. The new regulation allows the images to be 0.4 meters, which is 19 inches. That's this big. All right? Now, the original regulation had been in place since 1997 and is actually known as the Kyle-Bingaman Amendment. Israel has always argued that terrorists and other enemies can use Google Maps to plan and improve rocketing and targeting, that they can use these pictures to monitor sensitive sites and plot strategies to attack military and civilian locations and targets. The United States Commercial Remote Office argued that there are already foreign companies that provide the material, so it's useless for the United States to prohibit it. And that's actually true. I read an amusing AP release the other day about voter registration in Georgia. Someone received a voter registration form for his cat, Cody Timms. What makes this even more ludicrous is that cat died 12 years ago. The Georgian Secretary of State said that the form did not come from their office officially. However, groups bought the lists and they're trying to get people out to register. So you can imagine there's going to be a lot of election fraud coming up soon. Aaron OToole is a Canadian member of Parliament running for Prime Minister. His chances look good. We'll see. OToole is a conservative and proud supporter of Israel. And if he wins, OToole has promised to move the Canadian embassy to Jerusalem. This is a very good sign because if it ends up a close election, friends of Israel are actually going to win because of that close election. There's no doubt right now that there's a COVID surge in the United States. Numbers are daunting. Florida, Texas, Arizona, California, Florida hit new national records. The numbers of positives are up because the percentages of those testing is up. But there's also another element. It does not matter how many people are tested. Positive numbers are not always what's essential. We have to look at three other elements: fatalities, hospitalizations, and ventilated. Those three things we have to watch very, very carefully. And these numbers, thankfully, are not shooting up in the same numbers as testing positives. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. Did you know that Iran and Persia are not synonyms? Iran is actually a modern name. Persia was the name of a province in the ancient region. In Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, languages that we have very much so in the Jewish world, the area is called Paras. The book of Esther refers to the kingdom of Ahasuerus as Paras Umidai, which was both provinces, the province of Persia and Media, and that's important. Today, Iran is actually, the word Iran is actually a conjunction of two Persian words, Ariana and Vaye. It means the ancient homeland of Aria. Now, Aria is better referred to as Aryans. In other words, the Aryans' homeland. Yes, you heard correctly. The word Aryan did not originate with Hitler or the German racists. The word derives from Persian, and it actually refers to Iran. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.